Hello and welcome to this quick tutorial. We'll look at shading in Blender. We'll start by exporting a model from Rhino to Blender. Then we'll look at the three available ways of application, applying exterior lighting. We'll go through a basic PBR material application, and we'll finish by a glass and water material. Let's start by exporting our model from Rhino to Blender. Here we have our base model, and there are some parameters and options we need to make sure of before exporting our model. The first one, if we write option, we should make sure that units are in meter, otherwise we have to change them. The second element we should pay attention to is that all of our elements should have a material. We either have to apply the material to the object or we apply the material into the layers like what I have here. It's not a problem, like the settings of the material, we will tweak them later on in Blender, but right now we should have them assigned with different names. We select our model and we export it using the FBX format, Motion Builder, model from Rhino. Press save, then we keep the default options and we keep a medium meshing option if our model is in nerved surfaces. Okay. Now we have our model exported. Let's switch to Blender. Switching to Blender, we have our default cube. We delete that default cube and let's delete the lighting. We'll deal with the camera later on. I will create a new collection and I will name it Model from Rhino. And then I'll press F3 and I will look at FBX, import. Let's go resources, the model from Rhino, and again keeping the default options, and then as we zoom out we'll find our model. Also, some important preferences we should have in Blender. We press F3 and then we go to preferences. We have to enable an essential add-on, which should be technically by default now enabled in Blender, which is the node wrangler. Have this one enabled. Other option we need to make sure to be enabled, where we go to systems. If you have RTX, click on optics. If you have GTX, click on CUDA. For those who have Intel, they will have Intel Arc, the latest one, they will have Intel Arc option. And for those who are using AMD, it's the HIP. So have your GPU enabled according to which GPU you have. Another setting we need to pay attention to is the navigation settings. Have the orbit around the selection, perspective, and depth enabled so that we can zoom in and zoom out and navigate easily in the Blender model. And you save the preferences before closing. Another essential element we have to do is we have each layer here. All the elements we imported are parented to an empty. So we select all of them and then click right and we say select hierarchy and make sure we will unparent all of them. Have the mouse in the viewport, Alt B, and then clear and keep transformation. We want to clear the parenting. So all the objects, they have materials already assigned. Now we can delete those empties. We just select them and press X. That's it. And then we select all of our objects again, and we have to apply the scale, Control A, and apply the rotation so that all the texture coordinates can follow, can work as we expect them to work. Otherwise, if we don't apply the scale and rotation, the texture coordinates will have different X, Y, and Z and different scales. Now let's explore the three ways of Applying exterior lighting in Blender. We have three methods, either having a sun lighting the model, and I personally don't recommend that, but in case of you need just one directional light, that could be a good option, depending on your final outcome, or the sky texture that provide a more dynamic lighting, or the best one that is used by in the industry, which is using an available HDRI texture, which is a pre-scanned high dynamic range existing environment. So let's explore these three options in Blender. Going back to Blender, we set the rendering settings quickly. Let's shift to cycles and then GPU. For the options for the viewport render, we have the viewport and the render. For the viewport, let's just keep it 30 and enable 30 samples. We don't need more than that, and enable the denoiser. For the render, the final one, 500 could be enough. You can add it if you need more resolution. And the denoiser is already applied. So now we can move to the viewport shading. And because we have no light, that's why it looks dimmer. So let's start in this collection. Let's add Shift A to add a new sun, light sun. And we click on this icon to move to the sun options. For the strength, let's put it at 10. And because the sun is now pointing upwards, the sun is a directional light. So if I click on the sun, I press G and I move it around, it won't change anything. Why? Because the position or the location of the sun is not important. What's important is its orientation also, aka its rotation. So let's go to the object tab here of the sun and let's change the rotation. This one adjusts the elevation of the sun, and this one adjusts its rotation. To see it better, let's add Shift A, Mesh, and I'll add a plane in the ground level, and I will scale it, S to scale, and I will scale by 1000 just to have a global plane, and I will Control A, apply the scale. So now, as I click on the sun again, and I will go to Object, and now you can see the elevation of the sun and its rotation. And to adjust the sharpness of the shadows, we can go back to the sun options here in this icon, and we can increase the angle. As we increase the angle, we have more sharp or less sharp. This is the first option. We can also control slightly increase the saturation of the sun a little bit and the hue to go to a more bluish color. You can choose it here. But as we can see, this is not dynamic enough. So let's see the second options, which is having a sky texture. Let's delete our sun and let's go to the world tab in this panel that we call the properties panel, and we click on this color here and we go to the sky texture. Here we have a more dynamic sky, but as we can see, if we rotate on around, this is a dynamic procedural sky that is included in Blender, but it's overexposed. We just go to the strength then and choose just 0.1 or 0.50, depend on the brightness we want. As we can see that shadows are more dynamic and more realistic than the default option of the sun. Here we can control the ozone level, so it will give us more bluish sky, and we can control the sun elevation from here and the sun rotation. And again, we can control over here the sun size, which is the equivalent of the angle to have more or less sharp shadows. The third method is applying an HDRI texture, and here instead of these basic options, we will extend this panel and move to the world shading options. Let's go click here to change this panel and move to the shading editor, shader editor. And then here, instead of object, we will shade the world. Here, I will press N to hide this panel. Here, now, as we can see, we have the sky texture. What we see in this world shading editor is exactly what we see here, but in a node view. So instead of the sky texture, we will delete this node. As you can see, it's also deleted here. And we will add Shift A, an environment texture. Let's look for the environment texture and add environment texture node and plug it in the environment. Right now, we see this purple color. That means that there is no environment texture in the node. Let's open, go to desktop, resources, textures, and I have here a pre-downloaded sky textures. Let's make sure that we have take an HDRI instead of the JPEG version. Like this one, let's choose any one HDRI for this. Industrial sunset, okay. And here we can see the pre-configured. But as we had before, we reduced the background strength. Let's just increase it back to 1. And here we can see a more realistic shadow, but now we cannot control the angle of the sun because it's already embedded in this HDRI texture. Let's change this to another one. Always go to the EXR or HDR format when we download the resources. And here we have more sharper shadows in this version with a mountain surrounding. To adjust the height and the angle, we can do that. And now this where the node wrangler comes handy. We click on the environment texture, Control T, and then we have these two nodes that will help us control the rotation in the Z axis of our sky texture. As we can see, this rotates the sky texture along the Z axis. Again, we can also control the height, but here as it works in opposite way. If I go up 0.05, if I go up, the texture goes down. So we will choose the type of mapping to texture so that it goes like if I rotate, if I go up, it will go up. So if I do 0.1, it will go up, 0.2, it will go up. So it's more intuitive to use texture mapping like this. If I go up, if I go down, we have lower sun. And also the rotation is the opposite way because this is how the mapping vectors work in the texture instead of the point. This is how we can use like a sky texture instead of, but as I said, the angle cannot be changed here. Now let's take a closer look of how we can apply a PBR materials, which stands for physically based rendering materials. And they're usually like to reach this texture on a sphere, we need to combine several maps. This is just for examples. We have the color map, we have the roughness that controls the reflectiveness, we have the normal map that controls the detailed shadows, and we have the displacement map that actually displaces the material. And there are several other maps in the PBR materials. It depends on the material. To quickly find like free assets for PBR materials and HDRIs, we can just look for textures CC0 and we'll get some famous websites like textures, CC0, textures.com. You can download them. And we have ambient CG and explore all the assets. We have several different assets and we have like polyheaven, polyheaven, and that also comes with amazing HDRIs, textures, and models that we can use for free. So let's start applying a PBR material into our render model. So here in this panel, we will change the shading editor from the world to the object. And we need to click on an object. When we click on an object, we have the previously assigned material. And if I do Shift L, we can select by material all the objects that have the same material G, just so that we can see them. Escape. If I do Shift H, I can hide everything and only keep those selected elements. If I click on Alt H, I can unhide all hidden objects. So let's click again on the object that we want to shade, and let's go apply a basic shading. So we delete what we already have. So the main node, Shift A, we look for principal BSDF. And this is 95% of shading in Blender is done using this node. And we click on Control Shift and we click here, and automatically the BSDF output point will be connected to the material output. And here we can change the base color, the roughness, less rough, so that it becomes reflective, as you can see, or totally rough, there is no reflections. Here we can control the metallicness, which is only useful when we have low levels of roughness, so the material reflects more, and the diffuse material, there's more reflections, as we can have like goldish material, gold materials using this way. Or if we can make mirrors, if we decrease the saturation here in the color, we can have that mirroring effect, or we can have more dark mirror. This is basically what we do. So what a PBR material is, those textures that will come here will be inserted in those. And this, the alpha channel, is the global transparency. And here we have the transmission. But because of the metallicness value, we cannot see the transmission. We shouldn't have metallicness value so that we can see the material becomes translucent. We will go through this in the last section of this video. So to apply the PBR, technically we should add Shift A, and we should add the image textures node and then go to each one. But thanks to the node wrangler, we can just click on the principal BSDF, Control Shift T, and we navigate to our downloaded textures. I'll add cobblestone now. I double click and I have all the maps downloaded. And this is the color or diffuse. This is the displacement. This is the normal map, and this is the roughness. I just select all of those maps and press OK, and it will do all the job for us. So we have, this is texture mapping, and these are the different textures, and they are, all the nodes are already set up. But as we can see, the mapping here is not set. So the basic texture mapping is a box mapping, which is just you zoom in and you do the object mapping, but the object projects from the top to the bottom. But we can, as you can see, we start having something here, but we have to select all of these and go to click Alt and change flat to box. And now it's projected orthogonally in the 3 axes. And then if we decrease a bit the normal to 0.5 and also the displacement, because the values are too high now, maybe way less, we can see what we have here, the PBR material. As you can notice, there is an obvious styling of the PBR, and because we are in object and the scale is 1, you can see that this is 1 meter by 1 meter for each one. If I click on Control Shift Object and I Control Shift click, Control Shift click, we can preview what the object is doing here. So now to remove this anti-tiling, there are 2 strategies. The first one is to, based on this basic object projection, orthogonal projection, we can just shift the cells and displacement. To do that, instead of using the default mapping, I included a node that does this for us. We just have to do F3, append, and we go to resources, box, and UV anti-tiling. This is a Blender file. and we go to node tree, and we go to box and tiling, and we append this node. Now the node doesn't appear yet because it's appended to the file, but not that the node is there, but it's just appended to the file. We have to add it here. We shift add, we go to the groups, and box tiling is here that we appended to the file. Click here, expand it, and we take the vector for the mapping to here. Now we can see that it already does something. Let me select all of these and put them to 0 so that we go back to the default stage. And for this node to work, we don't need to have the flat projection. Just select all of this and take it. We don't need the box projection for the image texture. Alt, change box to flat. We just keep it as it is, and we keep the scale for 1. And now we can start seeing what this node is doing. If I increase the randomness of rotation, it will rotate each cell differently. But in this case, it won't be useful. This could be for a non-tiled texture. It's better to use the cell randomness. It moves them randomly, so our eyes can no longer distinguish the different order of the tiles. We can increase the size by lowering this scale, 0.7 or 0.5, and we could make it more obvious by increasing either the normal map or the displacement to have more details. And that's basic tiling. Another strategy is to mix two materials. That's also an available strategy, which what we can do is that we have our concrete and we will mix it. We have our basic cobblestone and we can mix it with another texture. So what we do is I would take this node, Shift T to duplicate it, and I will take the principal BSD, Shift T to duplicate it, and then I will Control Shift T again, and I will take, instead of this one, I will take a rough concrete. I have it already downloaded. I'll take all the needed textures, normal, displacement, color. I import them, and if I press Control Shift and I click here, I will preview this material. Instead of the mapping that comes from the node wrangler, Control Shift T, I'll delete that one, and I delete this one, and I would put the box and tiled version. As you can see here, I press 1. Oh, it kept the displacement in the displacement, so I just remove that one, and I instead put to move this node, I can just press G and I can move down, and here I will link the displacement of the concrete to the displacement socket of the output material. This is too pronounced, I just reduce it, 0.1. Now we can see that we have a rough concrete over here. This is also too much, 0.5, yeah. Now we have a rough concrete, and I will just disable this effect to see what it's giving. Yeah, we can see that tiling happening, but this one, instead of doing the randomness of the cell, I will do randomness of rotation. Yeah, we can see those seams here. We can hide them by edge blend. So I will do Control Shift on this one to preview what it's doing. So this is what it's doing. It's rotating the cells. Now we have to blend those seams. This is the blend scale. No, the edge blend and the blend scale to blend those seams. And we will go back to the result and see what it's doing. Yeah, we have the seams blended. We can just blend them a little bit, not a lot. But we can also use the edge wobble. Yeah, now we have less obvious seams. So the strategy is to mix those materials in a way that it doesn't become seamless. So what we do is we use a mix shader that will mix the two BSDFs. So The first one will come here, and the second one will be here. And we can mix the displacement by the mix color, and the same order, second one here and the first one here. And we will use a value for both of them. So I'll add a value node, Shift A value node, first one here, second one here. Now, if the value is 1, then it's the second material. Is the value of 0, it's the first material. And now I will select those nodes and move them with J, and select the other ones and move them with J. And now we will apply a mask here that will make the seamless transition between the two, so it becomes less obvious. So I press Shift and left mouse to join these in one node. This node I can move it with G. And instead of this value, I will have a noise texture. I will Shift add a noise texture, and I will Control T to have a mapping, and I will map it to the object coordinate. And now if I do Control Shift and I preview what's the output of this, they will be mixed with this. We need to add some contrast. Let's have a larger scale and add what we call a color ramp. This color ramp just changes the grading. And now if I move this slider, I'm adding more contrast. So what's white, we will use this as a mask. So what's white would be the second material, and what's black would be the first material. So we will plug this in this instead of the value where we had the node, and we will preview this shader. Control Shift, the mix shader output, and now we can see what's happening. Like the black spots are becoming, the black spots are the Control Shift, the black spots are the concrete, while the white spots are the cobblestone. And we can see that we have a more, and here we can increase, instead of linear, we can use constant, and we can Control Shift here to preview what it's doing. And instead of having this, we can add some detail, go to 7, and roughness also, and we have more. We control how it's applied. This is like a mask. Control Shift, and we have more realistic material. Now let's look at how we can shade glass and water in a more proper and tricky way. Let's move to our model. I will use Shift tilde key, and I will use the WHD and QE to navigate. To increase the speed, I will press Shift and W so that I can quickly move in the model. And then as I'm in the model, I can just press W and continue Shift to move faster. And I will go to the inside of the building. Shift T, and I will adjust it. So if you want to save this camera view, I can just, because I already have a camera that is added, I will just press F3 and do align camera to view. Then we have the camera aligned to the view. But the lenses are too tight, so I move to camera preferences here, click this, the camera logo next to it, and I focal length I just do 25. Now we have a wider camera. I zoom in, and to focus the render only on the camera area, I'll do Control B and I'll select this. To disable, yeah. Now, when we click on the glass, go to the shader editor, tilde key, frame all, and I will just delete what is already there. I'll zoom here, Shift A, Principal, ESTF, Control Shift, I click on it, and then I will come to the transmission and increase so that it becomes a transmission material. The roughness, I will decrease it. So, and now I have to control. So this is the transparency roughness. I advise you, like, we will control two things: the roughness of what's transmitted and the roughness of what's reflected. So what's reflected will be in the coating, and what's transmitted here. The IOR level controls like the direction of the light. For what's transmitted, let's just keep it very low, 1.1. And now, if I increase the roughness, this changes what's being transmitted, the roughness of what's being transmitted. While this one, I increase the code, the weight code to enable the weight. We can see some reflections. And here, this is the roughness of what's reflected. And I increase this value of RY to have more reflections. Let's go to 5. Now, if I increase the roughness here, you see what's reflected is being rough, while what's transmitted is completely clear. This is the roughness of what's transmitted. We have a clear distinction, so we can have rough reflection, completely clear reflections with rough transmission, or we can have the opposite. The opposite. What's transmitted is completely clear, while what's reflected is rough. We have more control using this shader. And then for the color, let's have some roughness here. For the color, you can adjust the color here, like having bluish sky. As you can see, like there is no light entering, even if the sun crosses the glass. So here to fix this, we need to make this alpha based on if it's a shadow or not. We just add Shift A, light path, and if it's a shadow ray, it will keep the shadow, like allow the shadow to go in. But we have to invert this value. So if it's a shadow ray, so when we need 0 when it's a shadow and 1 when it's not a shadow. So when we plug this one here, we have to invert it. Shift A, and we find an invert node and we apply it. We just put it here. So now we have light passing through. I will disable the HDRI. I will go to the world shading. I will remove the HDRI, and instead I will use the sky texture again, just to have more control for the sun without looking for a new. And here I will, the strength is too high, 0.1 or 0.5, and then the sun rotation, sun elevation first, and then sun rotation, so we can adjust it as we want over there. And this is the height. Yeah, now we can see that the glass, if I go back to the object, the glass, now we have, like without this option, you see there's just less light getting in, but with this we have more light passing through the glass. Yeah, an additional point here is that we can make the glass less clear by including or by, because technically the reflections are not in the real world so clean. So what we do is that in this roughness, we will include the map. So it will include some like fingerprint roughness. What we do is we include image texture, Shift A image texture, put it in the roughness, but we have no value right now. We open, go to texture, and we can download the fingerprint texture. And we can use just that one here. Node Wrangler, Control T to get the mapping, object mapping, and we need to make this box. We don't need to have the object untiling, and we can see the fingerprints, but they are too pronounced. There are several ways to reduce them, but the easiest way is to use the color lamp that we talked about previously. If I do Control Shift, we can preview what the color lamp is doing. So if it's black, that means 0 roughness, it's reflective. If it's white, it means that it's rough. So you have some finger drift. So like this. But for the white, we won't have like pronounced marks. If I do preview here, like we can see the marks are more obvious. We can just go to the white here and make it like less. So as we go low, we have more reflectiveness. But the idea is just to introduce some dirt into the, and we can contrast it a bit. Control Shift and add some contrast. I can push this one here. Yeah. And now we have a little bit more realistic glass because we're introducing some dirt, as you can see here. So now the glass looks way more realistic because we have way more, a little bit of dirt, and we don't have a super clean glass, which is not realistic at all. Now let's shade the water. For that, I will first rotate the sun to have more sun in the water, like that. I want to have more sun. And then I'll go back to the object shading, fill the keyframe all. And this is the material output. Let's add Shift A, the principal VSDF, and exactly the same thing we did for the glass is that we enable the transmission and we make the RY equal 1 so that now we have this is the roughness of the transmission and we will enable the clear coating and this is the roughness of the reflection, exactly the same thing. So what we will do, let's give it some watercolor here. Yeah, and then we can see what's happening in the water. Let's zoom in a bit here to start to see what's happening. Let me have no roughness and I can have like just just enough. So we need to include a normal map, not for the material, but for the clear coating to have some water-like reflections. Let's add a noise texture quickly and Control T, Node Wrangler, Object Texture, and here I will do 1. Control Shift to preview what it's doing. This is not enough. 5 to scale it. This is or 4. And then we'll change this height, procedural height, to a normal map. Shift A, bump node, and this bump node, we plug in the factor to the height, and we can preview the new normal. This is the normal map. This is too pronounced, but I will plug it to the coat, clear coat normal, and this one goes to the output. This is too much. I can just do 0.1, just enough. Subtlety is the key. Yeah, and we have like a water-like. It has too much detail. Let me remove the detail 0 and maybe increase the scale. This is too much. 0.1, 0.2, that's just enough. Yeah. If you want a more effect, we can. This is the clear coat. If you want to see what's happening inside, yeah, again, like the glass, there's no light passing through. If you want a light pass through, just the same thing, light path here in the alpha. And if it's shadow, change the alpha. We need to invert it. An invert node, press it here. And the same thing, we have more light going here. And if I increase the weight, yeah, there's a way to adjust this shadow. If you want a less shadow, more shadow, instead of the invert node, we will use a map range, Shift A map range, and this just will give us more control over. So the map range we just invert using the map range. So if 0, 1, it will become 1, and then 0. We just invert it. That's what we did. But instead, we will change this 0 value. So instead of being 0 when it's a shadow, it will become like 0.5. So we have less shadow, or 0.7. We have control over how much shadow goes through. So we invert, but we have more control of how much shadow actually goes through. Now let's include some caustics. So for the caustics, you can enable caustics in render, but that takes too much, and the caustics, they look good. We'll introduce what we call a mixed shader, same one that we used before to avoid tiling, to mix material. But here it mixes it with 0 is our material, 1 is black because there's nothing here. So we will include a material that is just transparent, a transparent PSDF. So this is a completely transparent material. So if it's black, it's opaque. If it's white, it's completely transparent. And we will introduce here a texture of caustics that have black and white, and that will shed light, caustic light here. So image texture, again, Control T to have it in the object, and then open desktop resources, and we'll go to acoustics texture, and we plug it here, and we can see here, oh, we need to adjust the value of this texture in the mapping. Let's go to 5, for instance. Yeah. So this is the basic caustics, and this is when it goes through this transparent VSDF. The basic caustic, what's white, lets light pass through, and what's black, stop it. So now the shadows are accurate, but we need our material here. Control I'll put this one. So if it's shadow 0, it's this, 1 is this, but the shift will be, this factor will be dependent of its shadow. It's not shadow. That's why we add a light node again. Light path node, if it's the shadow ray, it will do the transparency trick. Now we have some caustics. If I go underwater, we can definitely see some caustics happening here. I will go back with escape instead of shift tilde key. Yeah, and we can see the caustics if we reduce the clear coat weight like that. We can see more caustics happening in the underwater. If we didn't have, if we did have roughness, that would be difficult for us to see the caustics. Yeah, a little bit, but we didn't have roughness, so just include a little bit of weight so that we have those beautiful caustics. And this is our end render. I hope this quick tutorial helped with creating glass, water, PBR texture in a more realistic way. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.